its light upon the steps as they entered the gloomy receptacle of the departed. Eleanor half repented having ventured within its dreary limits. So much did the appearance of the yawning catacombs, surcharged with mortality, and above all, the ghostly figure of the grim knight, affect her with dread, as she looked wistfully around. She required all the support her brother's arm could afford her, nor was Mrs. Mowbray altogether unmoved. "And all the family are here interred, you say?" inquired the latter. "All," replied the sexton. "Where, then, lies Sir Reginald's younger brother?" "Who?" exclaimed Peter, starting. "Alan Rookwood." "What of him?" "Nothing of moment, but I thought you could perhaps inform me. He died young." "He did," replied Peter, in an altered tone. "Very young, but not before he had lived to an old age of wretchedness. Do you know his story, madam?" "I have heard it." "From your father's lips?" "From Sir Reginald Rookwood's never. Call him not my father, sir. Even here I will not have him named so to me." "Your pardon, madam," returned the sexton. "Great cruelty was shown to the Lady Eleanor, and may well call forth implacable resentment in her child. Yet methinks the wrong he did his brother Alan was the foulest stain with which Sir Reginald's black soul was dyed." "With what particular wrong dost thou charge Sir Reginald?" demanded Major Mowbray. "What injury did he inflict upon his brother Alan?" "He wronged his brother's honor," replied the sexton. "He robbed him of his wife, poisoned his existence, and hurried him to an untimely grave." Eleanor shudderingly held back during this horrible narration, the hearing of which she would willingly have shunned, had it been possible. "Can this be true?" asked the major. "Too true, my son," replied Mrs. Mowbray, sorrowfully. "And where lies the unfortunate Alan?" asked Major Mowbray. "'Twixt two crossroads. Where else should the suicide lie?" Evading any further question, Peter hastily traversed the vault, elevating the light so as to reveal the contents of each cell. One circumstance filled him with surprise and dismay. He could nowhere perceive the coffin of his daughter. In vain he peered into every catacomb. They were apparently undisturbed, and, with much internal marvelling and misgiving, Peter gave up the search. "That vision is now explained," muttered he. "The body is removed, but by whom? Death! Can I doubt? It must be Lady Rookwood. Who else can have any interest in its removal? She has acted boldly, but she shall yet have reason to repent her temerity." As he continued his search, his companions silently followed. Suddenly he stopped, and, signifying that all was finished, they not unwillingly quitted this abode of horror, leaving him behind them. "It is a dreadful place," whispered Eleanor to her mother. "Nor would I have visited it, had I conceived anything of its horrors. And that strange man, who or what is he?" "Ay, who is he?" repeated Major Mowbray. "I recollect him now," replied Mrs. Mowbray. "He is one who has never been connected with the family. He had a daughter whose beauty was her ruin. It is a sad tale. I cannot tell it now. You have heard enough of misery and guilt. But that may account for his bitterness of speech. He was a dependent upon my poor brother." "Poor man," replied Eleanor. "If he has been unfortunate, I pity him. I'm sorry we have been into that dreadful place. I am very faint, and I tremble more than ever at the thought of meeting Ranulph Rookwood again. I can scarcely support myself. I'm sure I shall not venture to look upon him. Had I dreamed of the likelihood of his attending the ceremony, rest assured, dear Eleanor, we should not have been here. But I was informed there was no possibility of his return. Compose yourself, my child. It will be a trying time to both of us, but it is now inevitable." At this moment the bell began to toll. "The procession has started," said Peter, as he passed the Mowbrays. "That bell announces the setting out." "See yonder persons hurrying to the door," exclaimed Eleanor with eagerness, and trembling violently. "They are coming. Oh, I shall never be able to go through with it, dear mother." Peter hastened to the church door, where he stationed himself, in company with a host of others, equally curious. Flickering lights in the distance, shining like stars through the trees, showed them that the procession was collecting in front of the hall. The rain had now entirely ceased, the thunder muttered from afar, and the lightning seemed only to lick the moisture from the trees. The bell continued to toll, and its loud booming awoke the drowsy echoes of the valley. On the sudden, a solitary, startling concussion of thunder was heard, and presently a man rushed down from the belfry, with the tidings that he had seen a ball of fire from a cloud right over the hall. Every ear was on the alert for the next sound. None was heard. It was the crisis of the storm. Still the funeral procession advanced not. The strong sheen of the torchlight was still visible from the bottom of the avenue, now disappearing, now brightly glimmering, as if the bearers were hurrying to and fro amongst the trees. It was evident that much confusion prevailed, and that some misadventure had occurred. Each man muttered to his neighbour, and few were there who had not in a measure surmised the cause of the delay. At this juncture, a person without his hat, breathless with haste and almost palsied with fright, rushed amongst the midst of them, and stumbling over the threshold, fell headlong into the church. "What's the matter, Master Plant? What has happened? Tell us! Tell us!" exclaimed several voices simultaneously. "Lord have mercy upon us!" cried Plant, gasping for utterance, and not attempting to raise himself. "It's horrible! Dreadful! Oh!" "What has happened?" inquired Peter, approaching the fallen man. "And dost thou need to ask, Peter Bradley, thou who foretold it all? But I will not say what I think, though my tongue itches to tell thee the truth. Be satisfied, thy wizard's lore has served thee right. He is dead." "Who? Ranulph Rookwood? Has anything befallen him, or the prisoner, Luke Bradley?" asked the sexton with eagerness. A scream here burst forth from one who was standing behind the group, and in spite of the efforts of her mother to withhold her, Eleanor Mowbray rushed forward. "Has aught happened to Sir Ranulph?" asked she. No, not to Sir Ranulph. He be with the body." "Heaven be thanked for that!" exclaimed Eleanor; and then, as if ashamed of her own vehemence, and it might seem apparent indifference to her mother's fate, she inquired who was hurt. "It be poor neighbor Toft, that be killed by a thunderbolt, ma'am," replied Plant. Exclamations of horror burst from all around. No one was more surprised at this intelligence than the sexton. Like many other seers, he had not, in all probability, calculated upon the fulfilment of his predictions, and now he stared aghast at the extent of his own foreknowledge. "I tell 'ee what, Master Peter," said Plant, shaking his bullet head, "it be well for thee thou didn't live in my grandfather's time, or thou'st have been ducked in a blanket, or maybe burnt at the stake like Ridley and Latimer, as we read on. But however that may be, ye shall hear how poor Toft's death came to pass, and nobody can tell 'ee better nor I, seeing I were near to him, poor fellow, at the time. Well, we thought as how the storm were over, and had all got into order of march, and we were just beginning to step up the avenue, the coffin bearers pushing lustily along, and the torches shining grandly, when poor Simon Toft, who could never travel well in liquor in his life, reeled to one side, and staggering against the first huge lime tree, sat himself down beneath it. Thou knowest the tree I mean." "The tree of fate," returned Peter. "I ought, methinks, to know it." "Well, I were just stepping aside to pick him up, when all at once there comes such a crack of thunder, and whizzing through the trees flashed a great globe of red fire, so bright and dazzling it nearly blinded me. And when I opened my eyes, winking and watering, I seed that which blinded me more even than the flash, that which had just afore been poor Simon, but which was now a mass of black, smouldering ashes, clean consumed and destroyed, his clothes rent to 1,000 tatters, the earth and stones tossed up and scattered all about, and the great splinter of the tree lying beside him." "Heaven's will be done," said the sexton. "This is an awful judgment, and Satan cast down, for this is a spice of his handiwork," muttered Plant, adding, as he slunk away, "If ever Peter Bradley do come to the blanket, dang me if I don't lend a helping hand." End of Chapter 3, Book 2.